All right, well, welcome everyone to Mac and Keefe's Sergeant Major Recital.
All right!
Now, for those of you who may not know, Sergeant Major is the final rank in the Mountain Fifes and Drums. It has a white cockade that Mackin will be earning tonight, and the Sergeant Major recital is the final step in him receiving that promotion to Sergeant Major. Now, it's kind of a mix between an oral report and a speech and a recital. So there'll be music and there will be historical information given tonight, and then he will earn his promotion to Sergeant Major. So without further ado, Mac and Keefe.
Down. Dismissed.
Ooh, got the jitters. My name is Mac and Keefe, and I am a Fife Sergeant with the Mountain Fifes and Drums. And tonight I'm going to be telling you about someone I've been forced to read about since I was 4 years old, the 8th most famously portrayed character in movie history, and our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. So I'm just going to start with a brief introduction. He's been my hero for a very long time because I've always understood that he was someone that stood for fighting for what's right and for helping others along the way. And he's always been someone that's been self-righteous, someone that's been a good leader, someone to look up to. And he's just really resonated with me in that way. And that's why I've chosen to tell you about him tonight, because he's someone I've cared about my entire life, ever since my mom started making me read. So first, let me tell you about his early life. So if you look at the screen, you'll see a picture of the young Abraham Lincoln telling his classmates about his life and his parents. He looks very good in that picture. He was born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin in the woods of Kentucky. He was the second son of Thomas and Nancy Lincoln. He had an older sister and a younger brother that he looked after. Now, he grew up in the woods. He grew up in a rural area. He wasn't familiar with the city, and he wasn't accustomed with that life. So everything that he was taught as a kid, he learned from his parents, and he learned from his own self-reading. And he moved around as well. He didn't stay in Kentucky for very long. He moved to Indiana around the age of 11, and then to Illinois by 21. He stayed around the Mississippi River generally. However, he did have tragedy in his life. When he was younger, when he was about 11, right when his family moved to Indiana, his mother died of milk sickness, which is just tragic. And his father remarried, and he had a stepmother, and he came to actually love that stepmother. They didn't argue, they didn't really conflict with each other, and he actually came to call her mother eventually. And she encouraged him to read. He had about less than a year of formal education. He wasn't exactly the most well-educated person, but one thing he did throughout his entire life is that he read. He read a lot and he studied on his own. Some of the selections he read included the King James Bible, the Pilgrim's Passage, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, and the life of his hero, George Washington. Now I would like to invite Josiah Wisdom and Sarah Hatch to come and play Hog-Eye Man. Civil War. Fifes and drums. 10. Jen. 5s and 6. Up. Ready. Dap it off. Dismissed. Now, he loved his family growing up, and he was very much a family-oriented man, and that's what he kept throughout most of his life. However, he hated living in the rural areas because he hated doing chores, like all of you do. So, as he began to develop a moral foundation for himself, he wanted to go out on his own. So at the age of 22, after he turned 22, because during that time in Illinois where he was living, it was illegal to keep your own money. Up until you were age 22, all the money that you earned from work you had to give to your parents. You weren't allowed to keep it for your own. He didn't like that. So right after he turned 22, the day he was allowed to leave, he was gone. He left his father at age 22 to pursue his own goals. He mainly became a shipper along the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. He was working out of New Salem, which is a small town in Illinois, which is tiny. That's why I've never heard of it. And one of the main places that he went was New Orleans, Louisiana, because that was a major shipping port during the time. And one of the things he witnessed there that his father had always told him about and always scolded him about was slavery. During that time, it was a big controversy because conflicts were starting to heat up between the states when it was legal to discuss it, and legislation was being passed every day that was either fueling the debate or making it even more complicated. He witnessed it firsthand, as you can see in that picture. He saw how slaves were treated, and after witnessing it, he never came back. He didn't want to go back to New Orleans because he knew that's where slaves were allowed, and he didn't want to be a part of that. So he decided to stay in New Salem for about 6 years, and that's where he started his own shop, and he became a merchant. Now I would like to play the tune 1st of September 2. Later on, he would eventually go to say explicitly that he hated slavery based off what he saw during 1854, which I'll come to later. He was defined as an astute young man by both his stepmom, because they loved each other so much, and also his fellow peers. But now I'd like to move on to where his life starts to get really interesting, where he starts to get a rising influence in the world. So during 1832, what was known as the Black Hawk War, a very insignificant war that eventually most of no one came to care about except for me. That war was fought, and Abraham Lincoln decided to enlist and serve as a militia captain. He was responsible for overseeing a certain regiment of men that dealt with combating the natives directly. And he got in a couple battles, you can see there. It's not the actual battle, but he was comforting his men after they had gotten out of a battle. After that, he started to get respect for himself. He was starting to get respect from the Illinois community at large. During 1836, he was admitted to the bar, which, for all of you youngins, that means that he got to become a lawyer. He eventually served as a prairie lawyer for many years, garnering him local-wide support and also exposing him to the issues of rural Americans, which he came to fight for as he became a politician and became president. He also served 4 successive terms in the Illinois House, which is the state house, not the U.S. House. But he later went on to serve in the U.S. House as a member of the anti-slave Whig Party. He looked up to Henry Clay specifically. That was where he got most of his doctrines from, and that's who he really abided by, and that's who he really adhered to. It was also during this time that he met his future wife, Mary Todd, in Springfield during 1839. They also went on to marry during 1842, and he was the affectionate but absent father of 4 children. He was absent because he was so busy making the United States a better place. He gave birth to, his wife. His wife gave birth to Robert Todd, Edward Baker, Willie, and Tad Lincoln. However, only Robert saw adulthood. The rest of them would die in their childhoods. I would now like to invite Ian Phillips to play the tune Captain McIntosh. Fives, attention. Fives, up, ready. 1, 2, ready, play. Down. Dismissed. Excuse me while I dress myself. Look good, feel good. So, as I was saying, he started to garner more and more influence, and he started to become more and more popular. But his platform, the Whig Party, quickly dissolved as it drifted into obscurity. This eventually moved him to become what became known as Republican. And this had the similar ideals of the Whig Party. They fought for anti-slavery. They generally fought for the people that live in rural communities. And he quickly became a face of it. During that time, he actually ran while he was a member of the U.S. House. He wanted to become a senator. His opponent, Stephen Douglas, a Democrat from also Illinois, they didn't exactly like each other, and they debated a lot. Douglas supported slavery. Lincoln did not. And during one of his speeches during that time, he expressed why he felt that the Republican Party really needed to bring the nation together in terms of slavery. We are now in the 5th year since the Missouri Compromise was initiated, with the avowed object and confident promise of putting an end to the slavery agitation. Under the operation of that policy, the agitation has not only ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward, till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. This was during a time where the North and South, they really did not like each other. Like, they hated each other. There was propaganda being published on either side every day, not only concerning slavery, but also their lifestyles. They were really starting to see each other as enemies rather than as states of the same union. And there was some serious division that was occurring. Calls of secession in the South were starting to build, and they would ultimately culminate in what became the Civil War. I would now like to invite Josiah Wisdom to come play the tune Kingdom Come with me. Fives and drums. At 10, Jen. 5s and 6. Up. Ready. Down, down. Dismissed. He might have lost the race to become a U.S. Senator to Frederick Douglass somehow, but that really garnered him support among the Republican Party, and he became much more popular. In 1860, during the presidential election, he was surprised to find out that he was nominated for the presidential office and to run for president over such faces as William H. Seward or Edwin Stanton. And somehow, by a miracle, he was able to convince the nation that he could become the president and lead this nation in a time where it was most conflicted. However, the South didn't like that and they seceded about 2 months later. Right after he became president, the Civil War broke out, and he was tasked all of a sudden with becoming the one who could bind the nation's wounds and bring everyone together. As he predicted in the House Divide Itself Cannot Stand speech, the Civil War emerged to determine which idea, slavery or perpetual freedom, could prevail. Eventually, he gave the Emancipation Proclamation in regards to slavery, as the war was going on and as his side was starting to strengthen over the Confederacy so that he could make such a proclamation. In this, he said that slaves that were in the territory were free, even though he had no power to say that because he was saying that in regards to a foreign country. He also pushed for the passage of the 13th Amendment, which prohibited slavery in all the territories of the United States. He ultimately used his office to reunite the Union under a new interpretation of the phrase, all men are created equal. And he personified this in his second inaugural address during the time where the Union was winding down in the war. They were about to win, and he wanted to just deliver some words to drive home his faith in God and how that really drove him to pursue a reunification of the Union rather than letting the conflict of slavery tear it apart. If we shall suppose that American slavery is an offense which, in the providence of God, must need come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, that he gives both the North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in the living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, and fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war can speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that continues until all that wealth, piled by the bondsmen 250 years of unrequited toil, shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice towards none, with charity for all, and with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves, and with all nations. That really it sums up his feelings that he had towards wanting to bring the Union and the Confederacy together. He really pushed for it, and that's how he ultimately led to Union to a victory in the Civil War. I would now like to play for you the tune Downfall to Paris. He might have led the Union to victory. He might have reunited the nation. He might have stopped slavery, and he might have, in a way, you could say, ended the Southern way of life in terms of economy. This garnered him some enemies, and conspiracies started to fly. Right after the war finished, right after Robert E. Lee surrendered his troops, just 7 days later, he was attending a play at Ford's Theater. Most of you know what happened that night. John Wilkes Booth snuck into the presidential box, killed him, shot him clean in the head, right in the top hat. But even though he might have been shot, even though his life might have been ended prematurely before he could finish his job and lead the nation to Reconstruction, he changed the Union forever. He was really the American personification of what it means to be a patriot, what it means to really bring this nation together. And that's why it resonates with me personally. He serves as an example of how anyone, even someone from a small place like Springfield, Illinois, somewhere from a one-room log cabin in Kentucky, is able to go become a representative in his state, and eventually a representative in the US House, and ultimately become president. He set out on a goal to end slavery and to bring his vision of how the country was supposed to be, his Christian vision, and he fulfilled it. He set out and he fulfilled his goal. And now, I'd like to leave you with these words from the Gettysburg Address as to his real mission statement, as I see it, of why he fought and everything he did. And you can also see it right there if you have 20/20 vision. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. All men. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. The world will little know, nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what our brave soldiers have fought for. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we can increase devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That's what he fought for. He had a vision of truly fulfilling what he saw as what the Declaration of Independence, what the Constitution wanted. He wanted all men to be created equal. And he saw that with the 13th and eventually the 14th Amendments passed. He thought that God ruled over all, and he really influenced that with his life. And that's something that he carried with him his entire time. And I would just say to close, one quote which has always stuck with me, which he really did. He set out to be everything he wanted, and he just personifies it, and it sums up his entire life. Whatever you are, be a good one. Thank you.